I'm Dr. Duke, joined today by our international correspondent, Alex Newman, to talk about a story that we talked about on the Dr. Duke Show just a day or two ago. Alex, we have a really important story coming out of China where there is all sorts of video now. We have video evidence, we have a lot of documentation about how the Chinese are using incredibly sophisticated biometrical measuring tools to gauge how children are performing in every aspect of their schooling. It really is stuff that's Orwellian. Talk a little bit about what the program is.
Yeah, it's so Orwellian. I mean, as I wrote in my article, I think Orwell couldn't have even dreamed of this stuff in his creepiest nightmares. One of the tools that they're using in China now, it's these brain wave detecting bands that they put on the kids' heads, and according to the videos and the information that we've seen, it kind of measures the brain activity, and it tells the teacher and the government whether the child is actively paying attention, whether the child is goofing off and thinking about other things, or whether the system is disconnected. And so this data all feeds into these artificial intelligence programs and computer systems that allows the teacher and the government to kind of understand, this child was paying attention today, this child wasn't. And actually, this is being used now also in some parts of the United States. The company that developed it is based in Massachusetts, and it was reported in British media that they were using this in at least one school in Boston. So this is just kind of scratching the surface of the very, very creepy technology that's coming out.
Let's take a look at our first video clip about this.
Meanwhile, some schools offer glimpses of what the future of high-tech education in the country might look like.
Good job!
Classrooms have robots that analyze students' health and engagement levels. Students wear uniforms with chips that track their locations. There are even surveillance cameras that monitor how often students check their phones or yawn during classes.
Yeah, and that's just skimming the surface of what they're up to. And of course, in a place like China, where you've had, since the late 1940s, this kind of repressive government, the Chinese people are much more relaxed about it. But here in America, the fact that it's an American company that's producing some of this technology, perhaps it's being used already in a Boston school, as you mentioned, and the fact that we've been talking, we Common Core warriors, Alex, have been talking about this for about 10 years. We knew that when Common Core came onto play back in 2011, one of the things they were going to do was technologize education and use these kinds of, for lack of a better word, devices that spy on your kids' biometric data. Let's take a look at that second video.
This is promoting grit, tenacity, and perseverance. It is written by the Department of Education. As you can see, it was published in February of 2013. These are effective sensors that the Department of Education has developed and plans to use. That's what this document is all about, is how do we measure the students effectively?
And under the guise of anti-bullying legislation, if the government is teaching a lesson, or the government teacher is teaching a lesson about homosexual relationships, homosexual marriage, and your kid makes a face, or your kid slouches in her seat, or the pressure on your kid's mouse intensifies, right? Or blood pressure and pulse go skyrocketing, well, then it's fair to reason that your kid has the wrong attitude about homosexuality.
Ah, young Dr. Duke, if I had known then what I know now, I'd go deliver milk in a truck. However, go back to this, Alex. I mean, is this going to play in America? Parents don't even have the vaguest idea what's coming. They don't have the vaguest idea what's already taking place in their classrooms. Do you think this is going to fly here? I mean, what can be done to prevent this?
Well, very much like China, the American people have now become very docile. They've become dumbed down. They've become very indoctrinated to the point where a lot of them really wouldn't care. Kind of like those Chinese parents. Yeah, whatever. Who cares if the government's got all the brainwave data on my children? And I think, honestly, there would be some additional resistance in America if the American people knew about this, but most of them don't. And we've been covering this kind of story at the Newman Report on Freedom Project Media for many years now. In fact, we wrote an article about a National Science Foundation grant that funded the creation of a robot called EMAR. And this robot, according to the government, was designed to tell the government to collect mental health data on the children. They figured out that they'd be more likely to give it to a robot than a person, collect all that data, and then give it to the government. So we already have this kind of technology in American schools. We have the biometrics, the RFID tags in the ID chips and all this kind of stuff to track the children. So this is now becoming ubiquitous. And, just like in China, the majority of people don't seem to care. And I think in the United States, part of the problem is, again, ignorance. People don't know. The media is not talking about it. But these kinds of tools are already here. They're already being used. And I loved what you said in that speech, Duke. That's the real problem. I mean, it's so much more than just spying on your kids. These are tools to actually facilitate the manipulation of your children. And so they're openly telling us they want social and emotional learning now is what's going to be measured. Do they have the right attitude about homosexuality or illegal immigration or abortion or, take your pick of the issue. And if they don't, well, then they're going to need to stage an intervention. And if you keep reading in some of these U.S. Department of Education reports, they tell you they're going to predict the future behavior and values of a child. I mean, it's beyond Orwellian. It's already here. And so far, we haven't seen any mass protests.
Yeah, and that's the key point, Alex, that the idea that they're doing this, as we'll show a clip here in a moment where the Chinese moms and dads don't seem to be too bothered by it. And again, I think the reason is because they know that in China, if your kid doesn't have the right attitude, if your kid is saying things publicly or acting in a way publicly that goes against the Communist Manifesto, the Chinese Manifesto, they're going to get corrected one way or another. I mean, how many doctors speaking out about the Wuhan virus have vanished in China, right? They know in China what's happening. And the key is that they're doing this not just to collect data. This is not data for data's sake. This is data for people who want to transform the world. Go ahead and show this last video.
Companies we interviewed said the data can go to government-funded research projects. We spoke to parents who were unclear about where the data ended up, and they didn't seem to care too much. Santos says there's likely no privacy protection at all.
In a classroom, if you're trying to make an assessment of an individual student, you really can't anonymize it.
Right, and so, again, this is the thing that's so frustrating. The idea that technology has been touted as a blanket good. When everybody hears technology, they think it's a wonderful thing. And when there's technology in our classrooms, how much trouble did we get in when we allowed Bill Gates to put his technology for Common Core in the classrooms, where we started handing out Chromebooks to all the kids, parents not even aware of the fact that there's all sorts of things uploaded on those computers, all sorts of ways those computers are feeding back. They're not free. They're feeding back to the manufacturers and to the data watchers all sorts of information about your children.
That's right, Duke. And, our video last week was right on this same subject, right? They're moving now to replace and to sideline the teachers and come in with the technology to do the job that a teacher has traditionally done. I think the reason why they want to do this, one of the big reasons, is that teachers have put up resistance. If a teacher doesn't agree with turning the kids into little socialists or teaching them that they should be fornicating when they're in kindergarten or second grade, that's a big obstacle to the people who want to indoctrinate these children. So they figure, hey, we'll make the teacher, they can just be like a babysitter, they can supervise the kids, and the kids can do all their work on the iPad. But then we need feedback mechanisms. We need to determine whether the indoctrination is sinking in, whether the kids have the correct attitude as defined by the government. And so that's where all these technological tools come in: the facial expression cameras, the pressure sensors, the blood pressure monitors, the security cameras, the tracking devices, the robots. And so we are heading into a dystopian future. And unfortunately, they've already become very, very good at manipulating the children, right? There's still some who slip through the cracks, but as we get further and further into this brave new world, the effectiveness of the indoctrination is going to increase by leaps and bounds, and at that point, it's going to be incredibly difficult to maintain a free society, and that's really what's at stake here.
It is, and don't forget, too, that if your kid is one of those kids that's yawning or not paying attention during math, you can watch how quickly those kids will be, in the name of college and career readiness, right? They're going to be peeled off for careers that have nothing to do with education. At very young ages, they're going to start predicting this stuff. And we had talked about this too. People asked us all the time, why are technocrats like Bill Gates so deeply involved in education? This is the reason. Bill Gates doesn't care about ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. Bill Gates loves this kind of technocracy, the ability of technology not just to control kids, but to change and evolve the way they think in certain progressive, and it's always progressively, right? Certain progressive paths will lead them down so that all kids ultimately think the same. We're using this technology to eradicate individuality, to eradicate any opinions that might challenge the dominant progressive orthodoxy.
That's exactly right, Duke. And actually, this has now become a global phenomenon. You know, Bill Gates in 2004 signed an agreement with UNESCO to work on the globalization of education. And they talked about bringing technology into classrooms all over the world, creating master syllabus and master curriculum. This is the direction they're moving. And so you have UNESCO now during this lockdown bragging that this technology is going to be used now all over the world. We're going to have a total transformation of education. The World Economic Forum bragging about the same thing. The Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, same thing. We're seeing this now globally, and very soon we're going to find ourselves with a global education system that is not actually educating children, but that is transforming them, changing them, rearranging their values, and it is going to be a nightmare.
And here's the thing. We will get to global government, one world government, quicker through the education route than we will ever get the political. So if you take a couple generations of kids who are being educated globally, even though we still have our nations and our boundaries, and watch how many American educrats and politicians leap on board that, right? We need to not be so jingoistic and white privilege. We need to incorporate education for kids of the same, common core for kids, common all across the world. That is what's going to get us one world government faster than anything else. The politicians can't pull it off. The technocrats don't have the power to do it yet. But you take a couple generations of kids, you give them this incredibly one-sided, incredibly manipulative education, and in one generation you're going to have one world government.